Well, hello and welcome to this latest edition of the CryptoAM Daily Catch-up via Zoom, where we chat about COVID-19, what progress is happening, what lockdowns are happening around the world, any news developments, and anything else that's really happening. So we never know who's going to join or what we're going to talk about. Let's find out what happens today. Hey there, Alex. How are you?
Hi. Hello, how are you? I'm
Hey,
all
that's
right.
good. There's a bit of a lag on your video compared to your voice.
Ah, okay.
Not
How might I, Gary, how might I improve that?
I'm not sure. It might just be a Zoom slowdown or something. But who 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 knows with this kind of stuff? Or at least we can see each other, and at least I can hear you. So how
Yeah.
how how are you today?
Yes, I'm fine, not too bad. I mean, obviously, I'm sort of, a bit dazed by what's going on and the craziness that's happening right now. And obviously, I'm affected as well, like everybody else, both financially and in terms of my living circumstances, in terms of my income. So it's been very, um, you know, um, it's been very difficult, really, but also very strange, um, insofar as my having to spend this time at home, forced to be indoors, being quarantined, and consequently it's allowed me to do other things, sort of focus on family, think a little bit about, have a bit of time to think, a bit of space to think. um, what about yourself? How's
So in some respects, quite similar. That's why being an independent consultant, where I have to go out and generate revenue with customers to bring money in.
Yes.
It's been interesting, the UK government's stance around self-employed people and small businesses,
Yeah.
and I found it fascinating as well. I've actually set up a WhatsApp group for kind of like sole self-employed people, because
Okay.
you suddenly discover that the UK support at the moment through things like the grant scheme or the small business loans, this kind of thing, it's actually to do with either small-ish businesses that are actually quite viable and sustaining anyway, and just need a bit of cash to keep them ticking over for a few months, but they've otherwise got a pipeline. Um, or it's for truly self-employed people. And the
Yes.
thing with that is that I'd never really picked up on the nuances that there are, I think it's about 3.5 million people in the UK who are directors of their own limited company,
Yeah.
who operate very much that as self-employed, but they're not eligible for the government scheme because of how that works.
Yeah.
And I, like many others, because my income is so variable from week to week, month to month, I pay myself a low salary because I can't afford to, pay myself a lot when I have lean months and that. And when I
Yeah.
do really well, I pay myself a dividend every so often because the company's doing well. The
Yeah.
problem with that is that
And that's more tax efficient as well, right?
that's right. But at the end of the day, because I've had a few people who are saying, "Oh, you're doing that just to dodge taxes and that." No, actually, I'm paying corporation tax, income tax on my salary. I'm paying VAT. I don't know how many other taxes I'm paying, but it's basically however much money I bring in, it then goes to HMRC. Well,
Yeah.
that's the way it feels. Um,
Well, I did the same thing. I mean, I took a fairly low wage, and then I did exactly the same thing. I took the rest in a dividend, which just kept things reasonable. You know, it's just about being. It's not about avoiding anything. It's just about being reasonable in how you approach your business. You want
yeah,
to keep liquidity. You have to keep money in there. You need to pay your bills. So it's not like we're using offshore tax havens or anything like that, right?
exactly.
Which really is about avoiding a full tax burden.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
why I set up this WhatsApp group, I was quite surprised just how many people joined. I think we've got over 100 members in it now, and it was just to explore what all the various options are. And in fact, I've even produced a little guide now, because there are some grants available, there are some loans available. If you have premises, then your rates can be deferred or delayed. Your
Yeah.
VAT can be deferred. Your I think your corporation tax may be able to be deferred, but certainly there are options to delay payments, or to borrow money. But if you are, a single director of your own company, it's incredibly restricted, because the only thing it looks like you can do is you can put yourself on furlough, so that you can benefit from 80% of whatever your annual salary would be, which, as you say, if you're on a low salary anyway, is not going to be great. And you can furlough yourself, and you're eligible for 80% from the government then, which is great. But if you furlough yourself, you then can't go out and keep your company ticking over. You can't go prospecting or generating anything. So basically, it's almost as though the government's trying to kill businesses off.
Yeah.
That it's either stifling them or limiting them, or putting them into further debt. So it's quite a worrying thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that have come out of this, they talked about the fact that they had planned to do, to put in place. They knew a pandemic was coming at some stage. I mean, it was pretty obvious that, given SARS-1 and MERS and Ebola. And if we go back in history even further, you had the Spanish flu and Black Plague and smallpox, etc. So we knew it was going to happen at some stage. And I think they ran some modeling in 2016 around, how the country would respond to a pandemic. But it's pretty clear, isn't it, that the response, both in terms of a medical response.
So I think Christian's just joined us, and we've got some background noise on your microphone, Christian.
Sorry.
Hey, that's all right. You went on mute. That solved that problem. Sorry, Alex, you were saying about that they did an exercise in 2016, didn't they?
And obviously it wasn't sufficient. I don't think that they really thought the whole thing through very clearly at all. Granted, the pandemic, SARS-1 and MERS, didn't cause a quarantine response. They were able to, do workarounds, and we've gone into quarantine, which makes this sort of an exceptional difference in terms of, the responses with the other two pandemics. But it hasn't been clearly thought through.
I think
there hasn't been a well thought through protocol. It's all sort of been cobbled together, and as you quite rightly say, some sections of the the business community have been left essentially high and dry. I mean, I am essentially high and dry. I for instance, did some work for a company in March, and they obviously owed me wages for that work. They told me so they sent me a PAYE slip at the end of March, but then didn't deposit the funds into my account. They told me that they would be going to the government looking to furlough as a result of the fact that their business has now collapsed almost. They've got no revenue. I've now just today received another email from them saying that essentially that I am going to be made redundant. So even though I'm not a full-time employee of theirs, so I mean, in the end, I'm going to have to go to the government and probably claim that money back from the government. It looks like they'll have to go insolvent, and then after the quarantine is over and we go back to business as usual, then I assume that they're just going to, you know, start up in another name, or I don't know quite how they'll do it, but obviously they're planning to go, you know, to pick up as business as usual. If it's in another name, I don't quite know how they'll do it.
I think it's all going to be interesting in there. Sorry, I just want to bring Christian in on this.
Yes.
Christian, you've been sitting there quite quietly. Thanks very much for that. Whereabouts are you based, Christian? See, Christian's gone on to super mute mode now, where he's saying, "Oh, they've said my name. Where's the unmute button?" And
I don't tell him that you're mute.
Yeah, and we've got someone else joined us. AWC1. Who's that?
Hi, Gary, it's Alan from AWC Training.
Ah, Alan, good afternoon.
Hi. What are we doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah. We're just trying to bring everyone in on the conversation at the moment, and just finding out where people are and what the impact of the virus is at the moment and how they're finding things in general.
Okay.
How are you finding things?
Yeah, pretty strange at the moment. I mean, we're based down in the southwest, so we're quite far down, which is okay.
Okay.
We've just found out that they're building a new Nightingale Hospital in Exeter, which is just being built at the moment, which we can't really understand why when we're supposed to be peaking at the minute, but it doesn't look as though we are peaking, and it looks as though we're nowhere near the peak.
Yeah, I agree. I monitor the data each day, and I run a rough comparison of the UK against Italy, because it's interesting. If you look at most countries with the death rates tend to follow broadly the same parabolic pattern of that they climb slowly, then they go exponential, then they curve off, and it's almost like a standard deviation diagram, like a bell diagram type thing. And you can see most countries follow that exact kind of structure. The actual number's different, but the pattern stays the same. The UK doesn't seem to be quite doing that yet. That we've gone through what looked like was the peak, then it kind of settled, and you thought, oh yeah, this is where it starts dropping off, but it didn't. And it's kind of settled a little bit, so it's a bit strange. But to be honest, I mean, I spent an entire career analyzing data, so I know all the issues with data collection, gathering, quality, and all this kind of thing. And you look at it, the longer we go with this, less confidence I have of any of the data anywhere, because you start discovering, like, Italy defines a COVID-19 death as I think it's anyone who's died who had COVID-19 present. So, you know, you could have had a car crash or whatever, and they test, and if they find you've got COVID-19, it goes down as COVID-19 death, which clearly it isn't. Germany has gone down the opposite extreme, whereby it's not COVID-19 unless that was the only thing that was present, and you died as a result, which is why their numbers are so low, you know, because they do it that way. And then in the UK, they're doing the press conference every day, which is just of deaths in hospitals. And then you look at the Public Health England and the ONS data, which gets published 2 weeks later, and you find that there's another third to a half of deaths which haven't been mentioned. So, yep, interesting times.
Well,
it is.
Certainly, paramedics, when they suspect they're attending a COVID infected patient, if that patient isn't seriously ill, they will actually advise that patient to stay at home. And then, of course, we've got care homes. And I think a substantial amount of people have died in care homes that's not really gone into the figures. So there's a whole swathe of the population that have essentially died at home. You're absolutely right. I mean, are they dying of hypertension, diabetes, or are they dying of the COVID? It's actually really quite hard to work out exactly, you know, how to quantify the figures, how to quantify the numbers.
Well, but that's the kind of thing. That's where, like, as a data analyst, I take a step back, and I say, well, okay, so we've got all these different definitions, we've got all these different meanings, all these different contexts, all these different issues about data collection there. Despite that, the patterns are still broadly the same. You know, you get this gradual growth, which is the point at which everyone says, I don't see what the problem is. It's just like the common cold or the flu. Then they start waking up, they get a few more deaths. Then it suddenly goes almost vertical for a while as it goes exponential, and then it curves off. And it seems to be, it doesn't matter how accurately you're reporting the data or how you're calculating the data, whatever, it all follows that rough pattern. So that's where I think, well, at least we can use that as a model. It's just figuring out what the numbers are. And that's where I think you're right. I don't think the UK has necessarily peaked just yet. But it's a bit like driving, but you're only using your rear view mirror to drive. So it's going to take about 2 weeks before we'll know whether we were in the peak or not. So we'll see. Christian, did you manage to sort out your mic? Have you now gone on mute and you've now gone away as well?
I was trying to send him a message. I mean, I suppose he can hear us, right?
I'm guessing so. Usually you find if people connect and they don't have any success for a while, they disconnect and they log back in again.
Okay.
So we'll see on there. So yeah, Alex, whereabouts are you based?
I'm based in Tower Hill.
Okay.
Yeah, right by Tower Bridge in St Catherine's Dock. I think one of the things that is fairly obvious is that the quarantine measures that have been put in place have barely sort of scratched the surface. I think that obviously it's had an effect in terms of reducing the virus throughout the general population, and we hope that we now, as a result of the quarantine, won't expose 100% of the population to the virus, and therefore we won't see the maximum amount of potential deaths. But having said that, even after 3 weeks, is it 3 weeks? It seems to have barely taken the edge off, what's happening.
Yep.
So, I mean, I in terms of, going forward, when we expect to see, business as usual, I mean, it really could be some time. I'm not quite sure exactly, the short-term view of, how quickly can we get back to business as usual doesn't seem to me to be pretty close. It seems to be off in the distance somewhere.
I think you're right. Hey, we've just been joined by George, who I began watching your video earlier on, George, on COVID-19 and crypto.
Yes, hi, how are you? Sorry, I'm behind schedule, crazy life, I guess.
Hi, George.
I can recommend to everybody, George did a presentation, was it yesterday?
No, it was on the 16th, I think. It's already 3 or 4 days, but I just was able to get a good quality one. The first one was very bad quality. So.
Okay. I just started watching it because it's very topical, obviously, about blockchain and crypto and COVID-19 and stuff. Was that on the virtual crypto conference or whatever it's called then?
Yeah, it was like it's called Blockdown, which was originally it's based on Istanbul Blockchain Week, but because it could not be held, so they decided to held it online. Mm-hmm. So yes, some of the talks, maybe only 30% were on COVID-19, but the rest were on Bitcoin, blockchain. I kind of combined the two topics together because there's a few organizations that started doing some work on that. Actually, there's more, but I put at least 4 of them that I mentioned at the end of the talk. But today there's probably about 6 or 8 organizations that are working on something that combines blockchain with something to help with COVID-19. Yes.
Oh, that's good. So how's it going in Bahrain at the moment?
Bahrain is, I think, fairly under control. I think yesterday it jumped by 100. I think they found probably 78 or 79 workers, because we have people that work, let's say, in construction or cleaning or other jobs that tend to be from maybe India, Pakistan, or other countries, and they tend to be in quite cramped quarters. So if one gets infected, it's very likely that, you know, a lot of those that are in close proximity will also get infected. So you'll get clusters of infection. So this is bound to happen. But I think we reached probably about 1,000 for a population of 1.5 million. But so far, I think that the number of deaths, I think, is 4. So I would say they are doing a pretty good job. I mean, including having this mobile app called Awareness, which is kind of Be Aware, which they are using for several purposes. One is to distribute news. The other one is to enforce quarantine. So they distributed some bracelets that go along with the app that does contact tracing. I mean, eventually this will show up in Apple and Android operating systems.
So are they doing the same as South Korea then? Because South Korea, I think they launched an app, didn't they? I think them in Singapore did it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, their apps, each one is slightly different, but Bahrain has got one, Dubai has got one, Abu Dhabi has got one, Ministry of Health. So everybody's trying. I think there's probably 80% common. Some of it is based on open source work. So some people have shared the work on these apps, so it's available for other people. So, but I think there's 2 or 3 parts of it. One is the contact tracing, but the other one I think is quite interesting is the enforcement of quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
Like our accountant, CFO was kind of under quarantine for whatever reason. I mean, he didn't have anything, but he got put on quarantine. So the app was calling him every hour or so. He had to take a photo, make sure he was in proximity of his mobile. Otherwise, you know, the penalty can be quite high.
So does he have to get
3 months jail?
So does he have to get like a work permit to go outdoors type of thing then? Is that how that works?
We're in quarantine, there's no permit to go out. Actually, that's the nice thing about Bahrain compared to Dubai. Dubai or Cyprus, you need to apply to go out. If you want to go out for food or to go out for pharmacy or other important things, you have to apply for a permit. Unless you work for some critical work, like maybe you're a medical worker. But in Bahrain, no, there is no such thing. So the only thing that I've made mandatory is distancing. They made it also mandatory to wear a mask. So that made it quite, it's kind of a middle road, which I think probably, so they closed the shopping centers for 2 weeks, but they reopened them again. So it's almost, I mean, restaurants are still closed, but I think that is coming up soon. They'll reopen those as well, maybe with more distancing between the tables or something.
In the UK, I mean, I know a gentleman that's just come back from India. He flew in on Saturday, just gone, and literally got the bus to the train station, then got the train right the way up to Scotland, Glasgow. Not once was he tested, not once was he stopped, not once was he questioned by anything. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, if it's going to be a lockdown, it needs to be a lockdown. They need to be putting these things in, but they're not.
I hear fruit pickers. Obviously, the fruit harvest has happened in this month and next month. There hasn't been a big enough response for fruit pickers from the British population, so they're still flying in fruit pickers from Eastern Europe, and those Eastern Europeans are not being tested, and obviously they're mixing with the British population. This point, George, that you make, I mean, this was number 2 on the list of protocols in order to reduce the amount of infection throughout the population, was this track, test, and trace. That you have to track the origin of an infection and trace everyone that's been in contact with that person, and then test all of those people, right? So it doesn't look to me as if there is a track, test, and trace protocol in place. And the same with America. The point of that is that if you're going to provide billions of dollars and billions of pounds worth of sterling to support, as a support package, it's all going to be wasted if we don't follow the correct protocols in order to reduce the amount of infection in the population.
I think there's certainly a risk on there. Sorry, Nigel, I see you've joined us, and it looks like you got
Yes,
connection.
hi
Okay.
there. How are you doing?
Good,
Yeah,
good.
no, it's interesting what you're saying. I mean, I agree entirely. I just don't know why in China they've been very tough about it. Anyone going in is being tested and put in quarantine. Same thing happens in Israel as well. You can't just walk in there like that now. Sometimes you can be in quarantine for 14 days before they release you and let you then, you know, be, and then they still got, you know, extensive lockdown procedures in place. And we seem to be very weak about this here in the UK. We're not testing. We're not following any of the procedures that Korea followed, for example. As you say, they traced very much the source of each occasion when someone got the virus, and worked out, you know, who he had been in contact, he or she been in contact with, and checked out all of those people as well and put them in isolation. You know, until such time as the virus had either passed or they've got better or whatever. But we don't seem to be doing that. And I agree with you, we're spending billions of pounds, and we have put a large part of our economy on hold, and it's not going to be effective at the end of the day.
It does feel as though we're kind of like just following the crowd in a lot of this. I've always said that. I think actually the UK government is doing the right thing. It's just doing it several weeks too late.
Yes, yes.
So all the things they've suggested, the approaches they've taken, the lockdowns, all this kind of thing, all good stuff, but they're doing it about a month too late to be effective.
Absolutely.
So
exactly.
As much as it feels like, you know, as I said before about like driving using your rear view mirror, it seems as though they're using a very small rear view mirror that is steep several weeks ago. So, hey, Fernando, see you've joined us again. Good afternoon to you.
Hi guys.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I've been so busy, you know. So
you just work 24 hours a day, don't you?
I have to. You know, I'm late. I'm always late. Working too late, and then you know I don't stop. I cannot.
Fair enough, no problem. So, Alan, just coming back to you because you saying you do on the training side of things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we do. Where we are at the moment is we do the apprenticeships, where you literally go out and do it face to face. But again, with all this, there's a little bit of controversy going on because they're saying, well, you know, schools have got to stay at home, colleges have got to stay at home, but independent training providers, you should carry on.
That makes sense.
Because what they're saying really, well, what they're saying is that the government are paying the independent training providers through funding, so they're still paying you funding, so technically you should still go out and deliver that training. Yeah. But even though when you get to the site where they're at, they've been furloughed, so they're at home. So then because that they have then been furloughed, then we don't get the funding because they're not there, so we can't work, so we don't get paid.
It kind of ties in, I was saying with Alex at the beginning, that the government's making a lot of noise about supporting independent businesses and small businesses and that, but the reality is far from it. You know,
I mean, for me, there's no support. For me, it is literally a loan. Everything is loaned to you. So in the long run, you've still got to pay it back. So you still got to make the money to pay that back. So whereas you've got to go out and go, I need a loan, a £20,000 loan, you've still got to pay that £20,000 back. It's not as though the government's saying, well, I tell you what, here's £20,000 and that'll support you as a grant. They're not giving you anything. You have to physically pay everything back. So there's no support.
Well, yes. I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, I looked into some of this I'm a lawyer, so we obviously had a lot of calls when this all started up with the various schemes, especially about furlough schemes, especially about whether or not they could get money from the government. And those schemes, when you actually looked at them, they didn't really help you very much at all. And as you rightly say, even if you borrow the money, you've got to repay it unless they choose to write it off at a later date, which is quite possible in some cases. I mean, when they came out with this, they were saying, well, we've got to support business, and we will do it, effectively by printing sterling and lending money to people. But some of the schemes were only really operative to very substantial businesses, i.e. businesses that had a turnover of £45 million or more, and therefore were capable really almost of paying them back very easily, well, within a reasonable period, of 12 months, for example, is what the original scheme was. But when you actually look at the small print of all these schemes, they don't do very good for many people at all. Once you get into the nitty gritty of having to try and apply for some of these things, you will find that there's not really much there that will really help you.
I agree on that. Guys, I'm just conscious, sorry, it's 2:30 already, so the time has flown by. I try to organise these for just a quick 30 minutes, so it can be quite intense and we can go through things and that. But I'm conscious also that Zoom's probably going to throw me off shortly. So I was just going to quickly offer, does anyone have any immediate pressing things they'd like to say? Or I'll close this off in a minute.
I'm just worried about this funding of startups. Again, it came out, as you know, today, and apparently 750 million will be for startups who never raised money. But I very much doubt it, because the current schemes are only 1% of people are getting it. So it's just insane. It really is insane. There's people we're gonna kill in UK. Startups that were coming with amazing innovation, amazing technology. So the whole innovation is going to be thrown away because of this, I don't know, incapability of getting money to people.
I think you're right. In fact, I was reading about that startup facility, and I think you've got to have already have raised £250,000 in capital previously in order to be eligible. So,
but there is another scheme. That's for the first 300 million, 250 million. But there's another one, 750 million through UK innovation. Yeah, they will be granted that. But the problem is the usual stuff. The money will not get, or will not. Startups will not get approved. It's the same thing as is happening until now. From 28,000 loans, only 6,000 were approved. It's insane.
Guys, with such a wonderfully positive note, I kind of need to close this off now. I'm sorry about that. But
thanks, Gary.
Thank you very much for coming along today. We run these every day at 2:30. Always welcome all inputs. Sometimes we get people like George, dialing in from the Middle East. Sometimes it's everyone from London or Bristol. We never know. But thanks a lot for coming along, and I'll sign off my usual thing now, which is now wash your hands.
Yes.
Have a good day, guys. Bye now.
You too. Bye.
Nice meeting you all, gentlemen.